So all around the world, education's become the primary liberator of talent. And education's meant to be a systematic approach to knowledge, which I think it is. And so all around the world you'll find middle class and other people engaging in some kind of structured form of education. And so it's a vital, vital part of the kind of world we're living in now, which is going to go through more and more change, which requires more and more understanding and insight.
When you say it's a systematic way to acquiring knowledge, I think that's something that resonates very well. I think people just go to school because that's what they're told to do, right? They don't think about why they're there or what they're doing that for. And when you're talking about what does the future hold, I think it's about people being more thoughtful about why they're learning. And if the educators don't know that, I think they should at least be asking that themselves. Parents should be asking that. I think they're part of that journey of shaping their child's education, right?
Do you think there's a big intergenerational tension about understanding what education is or can be?
I think definitely. I think, if there's a child in school right now, that child's parents probably just went through the system and trusted it and everything worked out. Whereas being a child in school right now, it's you understand that the world is so much more than what school is providing for you, that you start to question whether your school is giving you enough. Right. And so your parents are trying to find out why you're not appreciating this.
So the schools I've been to lately, the technology has made a difference, but the system is more or less the same as it was 100 years ago. And so it's very systematized, it's quite hierarchical, quite in a way bureaucratic, even assessment. What are your thoughts about where that needs to go?
Yeah, look, I think there's going to be like this massive unschooling movement, right? I mean, I think this is happening already in the States, where parents are starting to realize that they need to play a role in designing their child's education, right? I think when you look at Stanford University, there's this project that's called Stanford 2025, and they're looking at the future of higher education, and they're saying, instead of having our students register for majors, we'll have them register for missions, right? So I'm not going to just do biology and mathematics, but how could biology and mathematics come together to help me solve something in healthcare?
So in the business school we call it action learning, that you start with a problem and then you find out what you need to learn to try and create the opportunity to deal with the problem. Is that what you're referring to?
Absolutely, and now that you're doing it at business school level, I think there are a lot of people that are graduating from schools like yours, like Stanford, who are now going to start other schools to provide action learning to 5-year-olds, right? Absolutely. And we're seeing that coming out now in Finland and other places.
But on the other hand, there's a need, I think, for the classics, for the kind of, as you say, for the reflection and the deeper understanding of history, how systems work. One can't ignore all of that. So in spite of the pace of change being so high, which education is struggling to keep up with, we've got to, in a way, retain some of the classics. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Say maths, for example.
Yeah, look, I mean, you see a lot of schools popping up in South Africa, right, to so-called, follow the new movement of education. And when I talk to schools, I say, look, we still need to keep a lot of things in the way that they are. People still need to study maths, biology, languages, social sciences. And then I think what we're talking about is just another layer. The so-called action learning is another layer. How might you prototype? How might you apply? How might you figure out the why? Yes, keep the classics and build something on top of it. I think this is all schools need to do. It's really not that transformational, if you will.
I don't know, I would say it's more of a core than a layer. Because we need the kinds of Imagineers, people who have great creativity but also understand the practicalities. And the way to learn is in fact by doing. So I certainly see action learning, giving people a project, a mission, a challenge as core to how we learn. And we've probably done enough about how we learn. And of course we all learn very differently. I was put in a regiment of learning, and it had very little appeal to me, certainly, and to many. And the ones who seemed to do well at school were the ones who took the rote learning. We find this a lot in Asia, in China and Japan, where rote learning is the core. I think it's much more exciting than that, much more holistic, and the core of this is doing.
Absolutely. I mean, usually when I talk about like where I think education is going, we've gone now from this thinking to now doing, which is of course is very design orientated. This notion of being somebody that actions on things, and then I think that after doing, they're circling back to this conversation of being. Okay, and it sometimes sounds elusive when you talk about it.
Which is the why.
Which is the why question, and
There's another great tragedy of 20th century thinking applied to the 21st century in education, which is that when you've finished university, you're done. And what we know about today is that in 20 years' time, the rate of change will be so high that you have to keep learning. So I'm sure you also buy into the idea of continuous learning.
I mean, for sure. I mean, like, especially if the world is changing every so often, especially over the next few decades, I think whatever you're learning at school right now is going to be hardly relevant by the time you start working on anything remote. You should always be learning. You should be reading across all the disciplines. You'll never have enough time in a lifetime to acquire all the knowledge that you need to be adapted.
What do you think makes for reflection amongst learners? How does one inculcate that ability to look in the mirror and ask the why question and understand yourself? You know, Plato said learning begins with the self.
Yeah, look, you know, when we talk about understanding the self, I think there are multiple components of this, right? I think on one hand, it's like understanding yourself as far as the external world is concerned. So I have certain talents, I have certain curiosities, I have certain values. That's something that comes from inside out, because then that will be applied to the work I choose to do, projects I choose to build. Then of course there's understanding self. I think when we start talking about the Plato's and his friends, questions of the self that are beyond the mind, right? These are some of the things that we were exploring. And I think this is closely related to being. Again, sounds very elusive, but who are you beyond your mind-made self? This idea of always making decisions out of desire and fear.
So it's the artist that makes that connection, the philosopher makes that connection, the scientist makes it come about, the engineer builds it. Is that how you would see it?
And we all need to be artists, philosophers, and scientists at the same time. Probably have our areas of specialization, but we need to be all of these things at the same time.
There's so much grittiness here that's contextual that one must expose younger people or adults to the realities of South Africa. But my motto always is learn from everyone and copy no one. So one must access the globality of knowledge and where innovation is. But the South African specifics are what we're going to have to deal with. And in some ways they are particular to our history. Would you agree with that?
Particularly to our history, I mean, it's like knowing what's happening here, trying to find out what's happening there, and then having a new perspective of what's happening here, right? Leave and come back, leave and come back. And I think as far as, for those of us that have the opportunity to do that for our children, right? Let's send them off and then bring them back.
Ironically, South African universities actually provide a very good value for money education. Our top universities are in the top 300 in the world. At the fees we pay, in fact, it's a pretty good investment. The problem, of course, many people are having, because they're feeling a little edgy about the country, is they're considering offshore. And I always say that a global experience at whatever age is vital in the next 20 years. But it's a very big leap of faith to put the investment and time and the risk of the connections with people to send them overseas. So how do we get that mix of the local with the global?
Yeah, look, you're saying that education here is really good. Education here is incredible, right? I think when we're talking as far as like knowledge and what knowledge is being delivered, I don't think we're second to anyone in the world. I think when we go back to this question of randomness that you talk about, you just can't really experience that much randomness when you haven't removed yourself from your environment. So it's like, what knowledge would you go out and acquire? What knowledge would you go out and create, right? So then we've been like this society of knowledge acquirers over the last 100 years. Stop creating knowledge as such. And I think that when you have this opportunity to travel, to go out and study abroad, I don't think that's a replacement of studying here either. Whether it's studying here formally or informally, I think for a lot of South Africans who are going to be sending their children out, I think having them come back, I think is an exceptional opportunity for them, for what their families can realize over the next century. I think we're seeing a lot of other continents wanting to come here. So it's not leaving because things are not happening here. It's leaving because you want to come back with a new lens.
Because in many ways, South Africa is a petri dish. It's an experimental biology lab of the human condition, of confidence in each other, of building institutions and so on. So we're kind of quite an experimental kind of society. Or do you think we're very conservative? Because sometimes I look at someone and say we're very conservative, in fact.
No, I mean, I like these words that you're using. I mean, it is experimental, and that makes things fun. Because I don't think we can call our country a developing country in all aspects anymore, right? In many ways, we're making major leaps from other countries. So if you talk about building new school systems, we don't have to change old ones, because there's a bunch of children that have never seen school. So how do we start from the beginning? That's a massive opportunity, more so than countries like, let's say, the Scandinavian countries or North American countries have. as far as experimental for what school or work could look like, this is a brilliant place to do that.
So I did a commerce degree. My father said, no one in my family had been to university. And so he said, if you're going to go, you have to do business, because that's how you'll earn more money, which I did badly. And then I studied history, informally. And I would say if I had a chance to study again, it would probably be history, because a lot of what happened, one of the things about this excitement about the future is it has a seductive pretense that everything will be new, but it's never like that. So what I always say is the future is history waiting to happen unless something else happens, and innovators create the something else. But you have to understand how we've got in the room to know what you're doing in the room, to imagine how you're going to get out of the room. And how you've got in the room and what you're doing in the room is not how you're going to get out of the room. So the delta, the change factor, is this tension between what is next and how we've got in the room. And history is the great teacher of that, because nothing we're doing in one way has never been done before. Systems have changed, revolutions have happened, great artists have developed new ideas, technologists have made new things. That is the pattern of human activity, and that's going to continue. Maybe in a different form, but always with the same substance.
Yeah, we should be friends, I think.
We are.
Because, I'm just really happy that you mentioned, a subject that comes out of the humanities and the social sciences. Because when I was in school, I was enrolled in business, but I skipped all those classes to sit in visual arts, to sit in anthropology, right? To sit in sociology, to find out what's happening in the world as far as where are humans going, where have we come from, and who are we? Because I think that when you go back to business and technology, those are just a matter of tools that are being applied to people.
So this country, as far as I can see, there are more CAs running our companies than any other country in the world.
Yeah, I've seen that.
It's an extraordinary thing. So would we agree that the insight is the mix between imagination and rationality? And therefore the balanced mind is able to put the combination together. And those are the great innovators. Elon Musk as a good example. And so this mix of, for parents I'm thinking now, that it's very important that your kids have certain experiences, build certain attitudes, and then education gives them knowledge. But it's this blend of the left and the right brain, the rational and the intuitive. Most great innovators, people that are confronting an era of innovation as we are, need that balance. And so families need to make sure that all members of the family are experiencing this mix of things. And my argument is, in a fast-changing country, in a multicultural country, under pressure, because we're definitely under pressure, we're not clear how it's going to work out in the experiment. You have to get that balance as early as you can.
100%.
And would you also have chosen history or philosophy?
What would I have chosen? So because I leaned so much towards the arts and the social sciences, I would have probably taken physics.
Right. Well, physics in a way is art. If you look at Einstein, he was a great philosopher.
Well, there we go. I think that's what it comes down to in the end. Because if you was to study the cosmos, you could either do it through philosophy and contemplation, or through another language, which you just call physics.
I was studying Picasso the other day, and I don't know much about art, but Picasso and his techniques required a deep understanding of the chemistry of paints.
Absolutely.
So this blend of the two is, it's the 0-1, it's the creativity of life that comes about because we understand 0-1, the rational, along with the intuitive. And that's really what South Africans have to do.
I think so. Immersive learning. It means a lot of things, but it sounds like I'm talking about technology. When you talk about coding schools coming up, it's not just about being taught by somebody that understands coding or might be an academic, but maybe somebody who is an engineer at a technology company. Same thing in the media and the arts. How can you be taught by people that are in these companies? I think this is something that happens a lot at, let's say, a business school level, where you have industry experts coming in. But a lot of young people, like kids around 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, are extremely curious about these topics, and they would love to learn about these topics as far as how they're being applied in the real world. And so I'm seeing a lot of these things popping up in Europe and North America. If you were to ask me what could seem like an opportunity in South Africa, I think starting to bridge that gap between the theory and the application, having more of this immersive learning would be one of the things I talked about.
I think on the practical level there are two. There's the state system and all of its difficulties, and then the private provision of education, and you referred to sort of the independent provision of education. But in the private provision of education, South Africa is pretty innovative and quite strong. So if the state isn't able to upgrade itself, because as we all know, it's schooling that is the key. What we're talking about is a higher level thing. It's primary schooling, even preschooling, that everything is done by the time you're 10, as the Jesuits once said. So the private space is very big, and we've got some very good companies taking advantage of that. So that's the one side, the sort of sectoral side. The other side of it is maybe to think harder within the family and within your life about the attitudinal formation, values and beliefs and points of view, and then let me call it the relational, experiential, cultural dynamics that give you the skills. We haven't talked much about skills, but of course education is to empower you through a skill. And so the skilling of people, not by sitting in a classroom. Maybe in South Africa that's the role that sport played. If I think of white South Africa, I think of rugby and its role in creating leaders and competition and so on. We need a broader set of experiences to give young people a broader set of skills. And part of that is the social skill of knowing others. And then there's the knowledge. And the knowledge can never be put aside because some of it is purely practical and technical. So maybe we put the three together to say, how are you thinking about attitudinally, what values and beliefs you're trying to create the thought amongst young people, the skills you're trying to build, the doing, the coding and the Facebooking and the e-gaming, along with the structural study of a subject. Would that give us a holistic model?
I mean, I like that you talked about social skills, right? I mean, when technology is taking over everything, all we have is each other.
Right.
Exactly. And how do we interrelate with each other, such as to create new jobs, new economies, new societies, new ways about thinking about the way we do things.
When you think about technology, do you think more about hope or fear? I mean, people are beginning to argue that humans will lose control because of the machine age, artificial intelligence, the algorithms. What's your take on that?
Look, we just want to express ourselves as much as we can as humans. We want to become God on earth, and if we can create robots that can be like us, there will be people around the planet that will make it happen. So it's like something that is going to happen anyways. I think they say that filmmakers are like the greatest philosophers of our time because they make everything and then the scientists follow. So I think a lot of this stuff is going to unfold, and it's the question of how would we like to behave in such a society.
But this threat is there. I remember Oppenheimer when the nuclear bomb, he built the nuclear bomb. When that first bomb went off, he quoted, I think from the Upanishads, who said, I am become God, the destroyer of worlds. Right. So technology brings dangers to us. And it's our alertness to the dangers. But you do believe we can manage this process as humans?
Look, I think this is like the major question across the world right now, like the ethics and morality of technology. Right, we're trying to figure this out now, because in a way we're also like afraid of what.
But are you optimistic about it?
If you ask me personally, I'm very optimistic about it, and I it's something technology. Being in a technology background, it's funny that I don't talk about this a lot, but I think about what AI can do for the greater majority of the world, right? When we talk about being more creative, when we talk about developing ourselves and being our greater selves, just not just you and I in a great school or in a great bank. We're really talking about like people at the lowest levels of society. What if people don't have to be domestic workers anymore? What if people don't have to do the hard cleaning, the hard jobs? What about if we give them more time to study, to read, to be able to realize their greater selves?
So the Europeans are beginning to talk about this utopia, to say 15-hour work week and 30,000 euros for every citizen. That comes because we can lead a better quality of life by harnessing the technology, which seems a long way from where we're sitting in Sandton.
Look, we don't want to work as much as we do. That's the truth, right? And why should we?
Unless you become addicted.
Unless you become addicted.